What if the grid is shut down? And what if the Great Reset takes away your computers? Or what if they implement this or that? And then there are all these apocalyptic scenarios in which people think Bitcoin will stop working. But we've got a test case of an actual apocalypse. You can think of it as an arbitrage on the fact that the world is still not figured out Bitcoin. And Bitcoin beats them all in all of their big brain theses and hot takes. Bitcoin's growing up. It shows that Bitcoin's maturing. The volatility is declining. And it's becoming a better and better money. If we get a drawdown less than 60% this time around, I'm going to be doing cartwheels. The current regime is happy to promote this idea that it's going to strengthen the dollar, but as Lynn Alden likes to say, nothing stops this train.
Saifedean, great to see you. Been a while, actually, I think, since we've seen each other in person or been able to chat online, but glad to have you back. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me. It has been a while indeed. The time difference is not in our favor.
That's right. We made it work. We made it work. And I'm glad to have you. There's been, plenty going on since the last time we spoke. It's been a crazy, probably year or more. There's been a lot of interesting, great developments in the Bitcoin space. But at the same time, we're still living under a predominantly fiat standard. So I guess the first question I want to tee you up for is, despite the fact that we as Bitcoiners get to see our lives continue to improve, what currently still infuriates you the most about the world living on a fiat standard?
Oof, it's a very, very, very long list. It needs books, yeah. But I have written books about it, so I there's a lot to say. I guess, yeah, it is the fiat money printer that is at the root of everything. I like to say, if Bitcoin doesn't fix your problems, then it's not a problem, because I think all of the world's problems, ultimately, all the world's serious problems, have their root at with the money printer. It makes everything much worse because it, as I described in the fiat standard, ultimately it just takes away the ability of reality to provide feedback to people who do bad things, because it insulates them from consequences. And so you can do bad things, but you don't have to pay for them because you could just run the money printer. So that leads to all kinds of horrific things. I think the most infuriating thing over the past few years must be all of the wars taking place, all of the millions of people that have lost their lives and continue to lose their lives. And it's just, it's very sad. It's terrible. I think it's, as I like to say, it's all a continuation of World War I. Ever since the money printer was put in place in World War I, we've just had an endless war. It's been... I think you could say World War II was just a continuation of World War I, and then all of the conflicts that you see raging today have their roots in World War I. Once the money printer was deployed for weapons, once the world got off the gold standard, the warmongers got a massive, massive boost, and all of the wars could just continue to go on. So under the gold standard, every government had a bunch of gold, and if they ran out of their gold, they ran out of the ability to fight. They ran out of bullets, and then the war ended, and that was that. But now we live in a world in which, well, since 1914, the money printer meant that it's not just the government's money that needs to run out for the government to stop fighting. It's the money of everybody holding on to the government money, because now government's money is elastic. They can make as much as they want. And so as long as anybody is holding on to that money, they keep printing more, and then the value of the money goes down. And so they keep financing themselves. So it was an enormous transformation in the way in which war is conducted, because it gave governments the ability to fight a lot more. And it's been absolutely terrible.
Yeah. We have seen with some of these conflicts, while it can't undo the money printer, in certain jurisdictions, Bitcoin is a helping hand, a tool in the tool belt of some of the individuals that are affected by some of these dire situations. One person actually that comes to mind that I've met a few times And you may be aware of just through the work of Alex Gladstein and the Human Rights Foundation, but Fadi Elsa Lamine, who has been using Bitcoin in and around Gaza currently, and for years actually. Have you come across any of his work? I believe Alex interviewed him for his book and everything.
Yes, yeah, I know Fadi. We've spoken a couple of times.
Yeah. Do you do you think that Bitcoin, I mean, as much as it, barring it dissolving the fiat infrastructure that we have, do you see it playing a meaningful role in that conflict, just as a way of funding things and getting the funding that is needed, in and around Palestine, given that bank accounts are just non-existent for most people?
Yeah, just a couple of months ago, I was talking to my uncle, who's usually been pretty skeptical about this, but his wife has family in Gaza, and he usually never really paid much attention to Bitcoin, but now he started having to buy Bitcoin because that was the only way to get money to their relatives in Gaza. So it's definitely putting it on the map for a lot of people, and it's been a lifeline for a lot of people because it's the only way to get money in and out. And it's really astonishing. You keep hearing about all of these scenarios about, well, what if this happens, and what if quantum computers come along, and what if the grid is shut down, and what if the Great Reset takes away your computers, or what if they implement this or that? And there are all these apocalyptic scenarios in which people think Bitcoin will stop working. But we've got a test case of an actual apocalypse. You've got the Israeli government, funded and financed by the US money printer, with unlimited weapons. The US government is just giving them all the weapons that they could want. And they've dropped about as much bombs as something like, I think, 10 nuclear bombs so far on a strip of land that is about less than 400 square kilometers. So it's a really tiny piece of land. And if you see, it's completely destroyed. Everything has been destroyed. More than 80-90% of the buildings have been destroyed. It's just a big pile of rubble. And it's truly apocalyptic. They've got no limit on the resources that they can deploy toward destruction. They've been very clear about the fact that they want to destroy it as much as they can, and they want to make it uninhabitable, and they want to get the population out. It's the most well-documented case of genocide that humanity has ever seen. We've never had so many political leaders go on TV live and say, we need to kill them all, or keep killing them until they all leave, and then we can just be rid of them. You've never seen anything like this. There are a lot of other genocides, but usually people are a lot more subtle when they do these things. And, they don't broadcast it on social media 24/7. They don't take TikTok videos of themselves talking about destroying a whole population while actually pressing the buttons that are destroying their homes. So it has truly been apocalyptic. And yet, the one thing that continues to work is Bitcoin. With all of this going on, if you can spin up a solar panel, if you can spin up any kind of generator, if you can get a tiny little bit of fuel, you can get a little bit of electricity, you can get your phone to work, you can receive Bitcoin, and then people are able to use Bitcoin. And it's the one thing that continues to work when pretty much everything else falls apart.
Yeah, it's staggering to see the scale of what has happened. Again, I definitely recognize that, Bitcoin isn't going to fix directly or undo, what has transpired, but it is nice to have a tool in the tool belt of individuals to be able to receive money, fund aid, things like that. So now I do want to pivot a little bit here, not entirely, but in the realm you were speaking of, the US money printer, we've seen a lot of different, a lot of people referring to a lot of the regulations and bills and things like that in the US that have happened just through the beginning of this administration. A lot of people seeing them positively, but we've also seen things like the Genius Act, which is bolstering stable coins. And I'm curious your thoughts around this, because on one hand, people are looking at this positively in a roundabout way. They're saying, okay, well, what is this doing? It's going to prop up demand for US dollars by making them more accessible to average people, which props up demand for the treasuries. But the link that some Bitcoiners are making is the holders of the treasuries are making profits, and in the example of Tether, dumping them into a Bitcoin treasury for themselves. So I'm curious, with all the nuance there, with everything that goes on, and the US seemingly very much pushing the adoption of stablecoins, do you see this as something that is negative or something that is in the long term positive for Bitcoin? How do you think of all this?
I think people are overstating both sides of the argument in terms of it being positive or negative. I think the idea that it's going to have a massive impact on saving the dollar is, I think, massively overstated. And that was the topic of my talk at the Bitcoin conference. Because I think one thing that people are missing is, yes, people are going to start using more Tether and more stable coins, but that's going to be displacing the use of other dollar-denominated instruments and dollar-backed instruments. So yes, people are going to, stop using the Argentinian or Brazilian or Turkish currencies and start using stable coins instead of them. And so that's more demand for treasuries. It's true. However, the Turkish central bank, the Brazilian central bank, the Argentinian central bank, and all of these central banks, they also buy treasuries. So it's not entirely new demand. A lot of that demand is being recycled effectively. And the other thing I think is that, and that was the mathematics that I did in the Bitcoin conference talk, if you look at just how much demand for Tether can grow, ultimately, it's not really going to make that big of a dent in the overall fiscal picture for the United States government. The debt is so huge, and demand for physical cash in terms of dollars, or I should say, actually, some of the demand that Tether is going to displace is physical cash. So it's going to be eating some physical cash. It's going to be eating fiat currencies backed by treasuries. But ultimately, that's still not such a big deal compared to the enormous size of the deficit. And so if you project the deficit growing over the next 10 years at the same rate at which it's grown over the last 10 years, then you predict some kind of massive growth in Tether adoption, you're still not going to be getting a significant reduction in the in the debt burden for the U.S. government. So it sounds nice, and I think the U.S. government is counting on this to an extent. The current regime is happy to promote this idea that it's going to strengthen the dollar, but as Lynn Alden likes to say, nothing stops this train. So I doubt this is going to make such a big difference. And on the other hand, I also doubt this whole idea that this is going to co-opt Bitcoin. This is going to lead to Bitcoin bolstering the dollar. There are a lot of doomers going on about how this is co-opting Bitcoin and destroying the mission for Bitcoin. I don't think it's going to be really making a difference in that regard, because ultimately, Bitcoin's out there competing against all these enormous other forms of money that are much, 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 much larger than Bitcoin. And they're all going to be eating each other. So yeah, people might shift from one fiat currency to another. And likely the dollar is going to continue to dominate the fiat world. But Bitcoin ultimately is so small that a small increase in the size of the Bitcoin, a small increase in the demand for Bitcoin is going to translate to much larger increases in price versus the dollar, which is essentially already the dominant market. It's already the vast majority of global cash balances are in dollars and in treasuries and in currencies that are backed by dollars and treasuries. So this is, it sounds like the optimist USD coin, shitcoin fanatics might want to pretend that this is going to bring Bitcoin's NGU, number go up technology, to the dollar, but it can't, because the dollar is just so enormous that even if more demand goes to Tether than Bitcoin over the coming years, even if Tether gets more marginal demand over the next few years, that is a bucket, that is a drop in the bucket compared to the overall demand for the dollar. So it's not going to make a big difference. Whereas a smaller amount of demand for Bitcoin is still going to pump the Bitcoin price significantly. So I still think it changes nothing ultimately. It helps. It helps the fiat people feel better about their shitcoin continuing to collapse. It helps them maybe find more bag holders. But ultimately, I think I have a very cynical interpretation here, which is that, let's face it, I mean, this idea that Donald Trump is out there looking out for the long-term survival of the dollar, I find to be not very compelling. I think he is a high-time preference Democratic politician, and he is a very self-interested Democratic politician. He's a businessman. He's always had a good instinct. Well, maybe not so good, but he's always been very keen to increase his wealth. And, you know, he launched his own stupid shitcoin right before he got into office and likely made billions of dollars along with his family from that shitcoin scam. So he definitely seems like the kind of person who would convince himself that, to put it politely, he'd convince himself, although a more cynical interpretation would be that he would just try to convince others that what is good for him is good for the government, and what is good for him is good for the country. And so, you know, you saw that with the Epstein files, how he covered them up, and he just said, you know, we need to move on and talk about other things. And you can see how it's in his interest to play along with his Bitcoin and shitcoin industry donors to go along with the whatever these guys want, because they put a lot of money into his campaign. They helped him launch his shitcoin. He's got some Bitcoin. And so it's good for him. He's making money out of it. So all of this stuff that he says about, oh, it's going to support the dollar, it's going to help the dollar, it's going to make the dollar stronger, it's going to take pressure off the dollar. I don't think any of that stuff makes sense, but I can see how he would be very good at convincing himself that it makes sense. Ultimately, in reality, I think it's just a high time preference politician decision where it's very good for him in the short term. It's bad for the dollar in the long term. And so, you know, let him have at it.
Fair enough. Bitcoin Well is the best place to be buying and selling Bitcoin in Canada and the US. And now with Bitcoin Well Infinite, it's also the best place to be making large buys at their OTC desk of over $50,000. Their white glove service gives you fast transactions, no slippage, and the lowest fees. You can scan the QR code on the screen or simply head to bitcoinwell.com/BTCsessions to sign up today. And you can share your own personalized referral link to earn commissions. CoinKite has been in the game for years, creating hands down the best and most secure hardware when it comes to securing your Bitcoin. The Cold Card Q is an absolute powerhouse and my daily driver, and it's ideal for newcomers and advanced users alike. The Tap Signer gives you a low-cost, user-friendly option for those just getting started or for convenience when traveling. You can head to coinkite.com and use code BTCSessions for discounts, or simply scan the QR code on the screen to get started right away. DEBIFI is the best and easiest way to borrow against your Bitcoin in a non-custodial way. Funds are held in a multisig escrow where you hold a key, and the platform allows for excellent hardware like the Cold Card Mark IV and the Q. You have access to flexible conditions, the best rates, and institutional grade liquidity. If you're looking to make use of your capital, don't sell your Bitcoin, borrow against it. You can head over to DEBIFI.com to check them out, or simply scan the QR code on the screen. Now, from one nation state tactic, set of tactics around Bitcoin to another, you were previously appointed the economic advisor to the Bitcoin office in El Salvador. Is that work that continues? Are you still in any capacity doing work with the Bitcoin office, or is that kind of done now? Where are you at with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not it was never a full-time job, and it was never it was never a constant work. But yeah, I'm still in that capacity as far as I know. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I guess my question is, there's been plenty of developments in and around El Salvador this year. There was an IMF loan that came through. Some people were pretty standoffish about that, not particularly excited. The conditions of that loan included the deprecation of the legal tender laws, and then more recently, there's been, I suppose, the accusation from the IMF that El Salvador actually hasn't been buying Bitcoin every day. They've just been shuffling Bitcoin from within wallets that they already own. Do you have any general thoughts about this? Do you think that the IMF is just trying to pull a fast one? Do you think they're shuffling Bitcoin? Do you have any strong feelings around everything that's come to fruition this past year?
My honest answer is that I know exactly as much as you know. I see things on Twitter and I just read them. So I don't have any particular insight on it. My being an advisor doesn't entitle me to have any kind of privileged information or any access to specific insight on those things. So I'm as puzzled as anybody on these issues. I don't know what's going on, but they still have Bitcoin. That I know. They haven't sold their Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin's going up. So they've definitely made significant amounts of purchasing power gains from stacking Bitcoin. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's been enough yet to get them to become completely fiscally independent and financially independent and not have to worry about borrowing from the IMF and borrowing from the capital markets. But there's still the Bitcoin number go up. Technology fixes everything, but it just needs time. That's my long-term hope.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, we'll keep crossing our fingers that they can, flip the bird to the IMF one of these days. But now on that, I guess, similar topic, Bitcoin reserves and everything. This summer has been lovingly labeled paper Bitcoin summer by a number of people. We've seen a massive influx of companies that are executing on Saylor's strategy that he's had with his company. Now, my question is, moving forward, when as somebody that's maybe a little ignorant and looking at this, I would imagine that a Bitcoin on a company's balance sheet, eventually it kind of finds a way to be valued at close to market price, maybe a small premium if they're particularly productive at deploying capital with whatever they do, or maybe a small discount because of risk regarding whatever their custody structure is. But am I reading that right? Like, is there? Do you think there's too much hype around this? Do you think the hype is reasonable? What is your take on paper Bitcoin summer and the rise of all these Bitcoin treasury companies?
Yeah, this is a difficult question. Honestly, it's difficult for me to answer because these are fiat shenanigans ultimately, and I'm not. I don't claim any expertise in fiat shenanigans. For me, the beautiful thing about Bitcoin was that since discovering it, I've been able to live like a humble peasant, where I just earn fiat. I spend less than I earn, and I put the difference in Bitcoin, and I don't care about anything else. It's been absolutely liberating to not have to worry about all of the kind of fiat shenanigans that fiat people need to do. So getting into debt and worrying about interest rates and worrying about Federal Reserve policy and worrying about geopolitical ramifications of wars on your portfolio and looking into commodities and wondering about what's going to happen to the real estate market. For me, I mean, one of the main advantages of using Bitcoin is to just not have to worry about any of that stuff and just stack your coins and then outperform pretty much everybody. And that's what hodling Bitcoin has done. And it's one of my favorite things to do on Twitter is to just, whenever fiat people start shit talking Bitcoin, to just ask them, show us how your portfolio and all your big brain takes have outperformed Bitcoin over the last few years. Because ultimately, all of these people are trying to do is to just make a good return. And Bitcoin beats them all, and all of their big brained theses and takes and hot takes. So for me, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, and I never recommended anything else for anybody since really getting into Bitcoin, the only thing that I tell people to do is to just buy Bitcoin, hold it for the long term. And I go to bed every night and I sleep very, very soundly because I know I never told anybody to do anything. I never told anybody to invest in shitcoins. I never told anybody to leverage trade Bitcoin. I never told anybody to try to trade on the short term. So just buy Bitcoin that you can hold for 5 years or more and you'll be all right. And that's basically worked out for everybody ever, except for, a couple of days in December 2021, 2022, where you would have been down on a 5-year time horizon, but all you had to do was just wait a couple of weeks and then you were fine again. So I still, I very much wish Saylor and all these companies the best, but it's not something that I feel comfortable recommending, and it's not something that I want to get into, because ultimately I'm not convinced of it in the same way that I am convinced of holding Bitcoin in your own private keys. And that's just, on a personal level, but also on a professional level. I don't want to be going around telling people to buy stocks and companies. I don't, I don't know how to read the balance sheet and to try and value the company in a fair way compared to its Bitcoin and compared to the operations that it does. So my official answer to this is just stack sats and put them in your private key for the long term. That's my only answer in general. But, I'll still give you my opinion since you asked. Yeah. I think it's a very, very curious question, what you said. I think there is a case to be made that for as long as Bitcoin is not the world's money, as long as fiat is still there, and as long as all of these financial markets in the world exist where the vast majority of people have no idea how to hold Bitcoin in cold storage, there's just going to be a much bigger flood of money out there that is Bitcoin curious, but not comfortable enough to go and buy Bitcoin and hold it in their private key. And so, the obvious way in which that money had usually been channeled into Bitcoin was through exchanges. You set up an account on an exchange and you send them your money from the bank account, and then you just keep your money there. You keep your Bitcoin there, and it allows you to basically benefit from the appreciation of Bitcoin without you having to take on the risk of self-custody. Of course, a lot of these people got rugged over the years. A lot of problems have happened, and there are failure modes to that. But of course, to be fair, there are also failure modes to self-custody. A lot of people lost their coins or had their coins stolen. So it's not like there's a unique answer that is universal for everybody. Everybody should just do this and it'll work out. Some people have messed up their cold storage. So one way in which people have gotten into Bitcoin without having to really sit through all of the Btcsessions YouTube videos and get their old calculator from Rodolfo, the gold card.
I have many.
Yeah, the way that they've done it is exchanges, and then ETFs came along, and now Saylor is really offering another new one, which is, and I mentioned this, I tweeted this the other day. I was at a conference, and it was not a Bitcoin conference, but I was speaking at a conference in Thailand, and there was this British money manager, and we just got chatting about Bitcoin, and he's curious about Bitcoin. He's interested. He's heard about it, but he had no idea how to get it done. How to get into Bitcoin. But then he just heard that MicroStrategy is just a way for people to get into Bitcoin. So he put some money into MicroStrategy, and he made more than $1 million by just buying stocks in MicroStrategy. And so that's something that is really, that is an enormous amount of money out there for people who know how to work their stock portfolios. They know how to pick stocks. They know how to buy. They could whip out their phone and move $5 million into a stock or out of a stock. But the step of taking self-custody of their Bitcoin is just an enormous jump that is not easy for them to take, and they don't have the conviction to go ahead and read the Bitcoin standard and go through all the tutorials and do all of that stuff. So it's an enormous amount of money. I mean, the global capital markets are huge. You're talking about a couple of $100 trillion of stocks and bonds out there that people are holding that could a lot of it could be shifted with an app on a phone. People would just click a few buttons and buy MicroStrategy. So yeah, I think as long as this is the case, as long as people aren't using Bitcoin as money, as long as you're not in a world in which your coffee is being sold for Bitcoin and everybody's holding on to their own Bitcoin, then there's an enormous opportunity for people to get their money into Bitcoin through these companies. Now, it's interesting whether there is a second best in this world, because so far, MicroStrategy has been head and shoulders above the rest. I guess MetaPlanet has also done pretty well. But, the US capital market is relatively easily accessible for the vast majority of money in the world. So people can get into it. So it's not clear that having another MicroStrategy is a very compelling value proposition. Why would you want to go with the second best? Something similar to the Bitcoin value proposition. Ultimately, you're not buying these companies for their core business, whatever that used to be. You're not buying them for their cash returns, for the cash flow that they're getting on the whatever it is that they're selling. You're buying them because they're being able to buy Bitcoin. So it's not clear that there is room for a second best. And it's not clear also because the more that a second company buys of the Bitcoin, the more it essentially increases MicroStrategy's moat. Because when you buy Bitcoin, you're pumping Michael Saylor's bags and you're making MicroStrategy a bigger company, and they're giving them a healthier, bigger balance sheet, and so allowing them to take on more debt and buy more Bitcoin. So there is a case to be made. I don't think Saylor has said that himself, but there might be a case to be made that there is no second best in these stocks. But, I think there's also a case to be made that this is sustainable perhaps for as long as we have fiat. But then think about it in a world in which all of the stocks are denominated in Bitcoin. All the companies are holding Bitcoin as a cash asset. All of your coffees are being bought and sold in Bitcoin. In that kind of world, there will be banks for Bitcoin. There will be all kinds of different ways for having Bitcoin accessible. And I'm not entirely sure that this value proposition still holds. This idea that this company is going to be buying Bitcoin and conducting leverage operations. I'm not sure that will survive in this kind of fiat-free world, in a kind of Bitcoin-denominated world. And so, Michael Saylor continues to say that he thinks that fiat will always be there, the Bitcoin will always be there. I sort of disagree, and we've had this discussion, him and I, before. And I think, ultimately, there is no second best. Ultimately, there can be only one. Yeah. Nobody wants to hold the second most liquid money. And, even if they do, as I described in the Bitcoin standard, it doesn't matter. People in Yap Island also wanted to hold on to their limestones. Mm-hmm. And they were very adamant about their limestones. Doesn't matter. People just made a ton of limestones, and then the limestones became worthless. And so inflationary money is just always continuing to devalue, and then money that holds on to its value continues to increase in value. So over time, more and more wealth is going to be concentrated in the harder money, and the people who hold on to the easier money are going to lose their wealth. Effectively, this is, you run out of bag holders. You run out of dollar bag holders to dump on, because ultimately the whole thing requires people to hold on to dollars, and it requires people to hold on to treasury bonds. And, you don't want to overestimate people's intelligence, but ultimately, you never know. They can't keep holding on to these bonds forever. They're going to continue to decline in value. And now we have an alternative. So you can look back at previous examples. All right, bond yields go up and bonds collapse and so on. But then people go back to bonds, because ultimately before, in the fiat world, you have no choice but to go through your banking system and your government monopoly banking system. And these banks need to buy government bonds in order to continue to operate. I'm not sure that's going to remain the case in a world in which we have Bitcoin as an alternative, where everybody can just go out of their government money system and keep their money outside of it. And so I don't know how long you're going to continue to have money outside of it. So I think ultimately there is a case to be made that I think these kind of using leverage in order to boost your returns, maybe it can't really go on in a world in which Bitcoin succeeds. And so effectively, this is an arbitrage. You can think of it as an arbitrage on the fact that the world is still not figured out Bitcoin. And so you can steal a march on the world because you know that Bitcoin cash balances 5 years from now are going to be bigger than they are today, because you know that Bitcoin's the better money, Bitcoin's going to win. So you leverage that knowledge to buy more Bitcoin today, and that allows you to have more Bitcoin 5 years from now. So I can see that being the case, but I'm not so sure that it can last forever, because I think it's essentially that arbitrage is being eliminated. Every time somebody buys a Bitcoin, you are reducing the value of the global dollar fiat economy, and you're increasing the value of the global Bitcoin economy and reducing that arbitrage opportunity. It's what we've been doing for the past 16 years, and we're going to continue to be doing that for as long as it takes, ultimately. And that's the interesting question: how long it will take. And it could be many decades. It could be many decades where we continue to be in this world, and in which case, MicroStrategy will just be an incredible mechanism for continuing to leverage this understanding of Bitcoin as being superior money. Whether it can last after that, I think, is a different question, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Looking for a simple and secure way to manage your Bitcoin on mobile? AQUA Wallet has you covered. It's user-friendly and puts you in full control of your Bitcoin with secure self-custody. AQUA also supports Lightning and Liquid Network, making fast, cheap Bitcoin payments and asset transfers easier than ever. Plus, it even supports stablecoins, giving you ultimate flexibility. Built on open source code, AQUA is transparent, trustworthy, and perfect for beginner and pros alike. Ready to upgrade your Bitcoin experience? Click the link in the show notes or scan the QR code on the screen now to download AQUA Wallet today.
If you've been around Bitcoin for more than a minute, you've definitely seen something made by CryptoCloaks. Since 2017, they've been the go-to for badass 3D printed Bitcoin gear, from custom home mining rigs to sleek hardware wallet mounts that make your setup look pro. I've been stacking Cloaks gear for years, and most recently I grabbed their Gamma case for my miner. Let me tell you, it turns some heads. You can customize everything, and of course, the legendary Bitcoin grenade, yeah, that's them. Hit the link in the show notes or scan the QR code to visit CryptoCloaks.com and stack your own custom Cloaks gear today.
Securing your Bitcoin doesn't have to be complicated or invasive. With NUNCHUK's HONEYBADGER plan, you get state-of-the-art multisig with built-in inheritance planning and no KYC required. NUNCHUK is trusted by users to secure billions of dollars in Bitcoin. The HONEYBADGER plan offers 204 assisted multisig, guiding you step-by-step on mobile or desktop. It works seamlessly with hardware wallets like TapSigner, Coldcard, Jade, and plenty of others, so you're always in control. Plus, with non-KYC inheritance planning, you can ensure your Bitcoin goes to your loved ones. No private info needed. Take control of your Bitcoin today. Click the link in the show notes or scan the QR code on the screen to check out the HONEYBADGER plan.
Now, this may end up being one of these cyclical lessons that we learn. I feel that since Bitcoin's inception, kind of every halving or so, there's at least a couple of large lessons that Bitcoiners learn. Like I found the peak of 2017, the lesson that came out of that is why Bitcoin only. And your book came out shortly thereafter and was seminal for a lot of people in and around understanding that. Going into the next cycle, a number of people understood Bitcoin only, but the big lesson was just because it's Bitcoin only doesn't mean you can lever the shit out of it, because a lot of people got wrecked from that and the whole custody thing. What do you think will be some of the lessons from this epoch in Bitcoin that stand out to you?
Yeah, it's tough. I don't know. It could be that we're just about to get into the lesson learning territory right now, because historically speaking, it was always 12 to 18 months after the halving where we get to the top and then everything begins to fall apart. The tide comes out and we find out a lot of people were swimming naked. So now is the time. And, just on cue, a lot of people have been saying this time is different. There's not going to be a crash. It's going to go up forever. Super cycle. And, now they're beginning to get the conviction in it. So it could be the time that we start witnessing it. However, you look around and you see, I mean, I think there is a case to be made that maybe the volatility has been tamed a little bit. It's not been as crazy this time around as it was previously. So here we are. What is it now? 16 months after the halving. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was in April. The halving was in April. Yeah. So in August, yeah. So 16 months after the halving. 16 months after the halving previously, and the last couple of times, it used to be pretty crazy. Or at least in the first halving, it was 12 months where the craziness really hit, but then it fell apart. But, there was... In 2013, that was when Bitcoin had broken into mainstream media and regular newspapers started talking about this weird thing. 2017, you had an enormous bubble. 2021, you had the Terra Luna and the China mining ban and all of those things. Not quite there yet in terms of the craziness, and not quite there, I think, if you look at the chart in terms of the volatility. So it's been about 3 years of pretty steady growth, not a lot of downward drawdowns that were pretty big. So it might actually be different this time, in a sense that it seems like a lot of people are just looking at the long-term trends, and people are just not piling in as crazily. And then when the price goes up quite a bit, it seems like a lot of the old timers are selling into it. And that's, I think, what's maybe kept us from having the massive spike. I'm just speculating here, no hard evidence to go on it for any of this.
Do you think that there's a shift in what's influencing the Bitcoin price? And what I mean is, obviously going from 50 to 25 coins in a halving is a pretty big deal. But when 95% of the supply has already been mined, and we go from 6.25 to 3.125, and I think we're at 1 point something inflation right now. Is what, given that the halving probably has a far decreased impact on price movement going forward, what is the major driver? Is it just how many people get it?
Well, I think it is essentially just that the supply is growing at a very slow rate. And so it was at around 1.5% up until the last halving. And then since then, it's been about 0.8%. So now it's the hardest money that we've ever had. We've never had a money that has grown at a lower supply. Gold used to be the lowest thing that we had, and it was about 1.5% to 2%. Now Bitcoin has gone below that. So we've never had a money that has had this much, this low of a supply growth rate. We've never had a harder money. So it's not really, I think I agree. I think, the marginal impact of going from a 20% supply growth rate per year to a 10% supply growth rate is huge. And then 10 to 5 is huge, and 5 to 2 is huge, or 4 to 2 is huge. But, 1.8 to 0.9 or 0.8 or something like that, it's not that big. We are already at the point where the market is mostly made up of existing sellers. And so that just means more and more growth. And it seems like so far, perhaps, it seems like it's reflected in just less sensitivity to the halving, in that the pump started in late 2022 or early 23, and it just continued steadily. And it's just gone up steadily, and the drawdowns haven't been very crazy, and there's not been a lot of big price crashes. I think it's just the market maturing, and I think it's really, ultimately, this is what makes for good money, and that's what I discussed in the Bitcoin standard. The reason gold became money is because it has the lowest supply growth rate, because essentially that means that the miners and the people who provide gold to the market are the miners who are able to affect the price of the commodity least. So copper miners are a lot more influential to the copper industry. Silver miners are a lot more important to the silver industry. Nickel, zinc, all of those things. The people who mine those things are massively consequential to them, because the liquid stockpile of these goods is tiny. There's very little copper, zinc, nickel, and even silver that's being held in a liquid market where it's being traded day to day, where people are buying and selling. And so the supply is a function of the production of the mines. Whereas with gold, the supply on the market is a function of holders. So money is essentially designed, or money is what serves the holders, not the miners. Money is essentially a technology for screwing the miners over. And that's why gold miners are constantly getting screwed, and why gold miners are constantly underperforming gold. That's a feature, not a bug. And it's just the way that it works is that the ideal money is a money that reacts primarily to the gyrations of supply and demand of the holders on the market. And the less impact the mining has, the better. And so that's why gold was the best money. And that's why Bitcoin is better money. And that's why Bitcoin is going to continue to become better and better money. So yeah, I think, I mean, on the one hand, you kind of do want the adrenaline rush and you do want the sick gains. But on the other hand, you also, I mean, it's Bitcoin's growing up. I wouldn't be sad if we end up not having a massive spike and not having a massive drop, and we just continue to trudge along. Then I guess it shows that Bitcoin's maturing, the volatility is declining, and it's becoming a better and better money. So for me, I think the real goal that I would like to see is a drawdown that is less than 60%. If we get a drawdown less than 60% this time around, I'm going to be doing cartwheels, basically, because the last time I think it was about 77%, the last drawdown, and then the previous one was about 80%, and the previous one was 80 something, and then the previous one was 90 something. So if we continue to improve on this, if we don't get bigger drawdowns, then I'm going to be very happy, because that everything would be going exactly according to plan. And I think another way of thinking of it very simply is a lot of the old time holders have seen what has happened over the last 3 times, where, when you get to that euphoria and then you start doubling in and you start getting over leveraged and you start thinking it's going up forever and, super cycle, and then you get burned with a 70% drawdown. I think maybe a lot of these people are selling this time. They're saying, okay, let me maybe buy a house. Let me secure my kids in case something happens to me or happens to my Bitcoin. And so that's why we're not getting that level of crazy. Perhaps the fact that people anticipate the drawdown is why we won't get that violent of a drawdown, which would really be how Bitcoin matures.
Interesting. Now, you've been chatting about gold here a little bit. I do want to touch on your upcoming book, but quickly before we do, I want to show you a framed tweet that I have of one of our favorite gold bugs. 1 second. And I guess we're going to play a little speculation game. The question is, when do you think that this framed tweet will come to, I guess, realize its final form? And you'll understand what I mean when I read you the tweet. This is from Peter Schiff. He tweeted it on January 6th of 2020. I immediately got it printed and framed on my shelf. And so far it's about 50, it's already realized one of its, I guess, subsequent forms, but it will reach it will age like fine wine over time. So Peter Schiff, for those Bitcoin bugs excited about Bitcoin's 4% rally in 2020, think about this. #gold is also up by about the same percentage this year, only with significantly less downside risk. If this is the best rally Bitcoin can muster, how will it ever hit 50K, let alone $1 million? So my question to you, Saif, is when do you think I'll get to fully celebrate this tweet? How many years am I going to be waiting with this on my shelf?
I don't know. This is just asking for people to dunk on me when I make this prediction. But you know what? That doesn't mean I'm not going to take the bait. So I'm going to go ahead and take a guess and say 10, 12 years, maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
10, 12 years. I'm going to be maybe bullish. Some people are going to call me bearish. But,
well, let's hope Schiff is
I'm just going to hand everybody a free carton of eggs to sling at me for no reason. 10 years.
I hope Peter Schiff is in good health and is around for me to dunk on him then. So nonetheless, I did want to touch on your book here that's coming up in it's going to be, I'm not sure when you're releasing.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. It was supposed to be out about a year ago, but then I decided I wanted to make some changes to it, and I've just been constantly revising it and editing it. And I'm delaying it. It's a work of fiction, so fiction is a little bit more complicated. Initially, it was my first work of fiction, so initially I remember there was a point where I was making stuff up, and then I just thought, usually when I write things, I need to go back and check them, and then I realized, wow, this is so awesome. I don't need to fact check anything. I made it up. Nobody can tell me, no, this was wrong. It's all made up anyway.
That's great. Then, what is it called, and what's the premise?
The book is called The Gold Standard. So completing the trilogy, the Bitcoin standard, the fiat standard, and the gold standard. But it's a work of fiction, and it's something that I've had in mind for a very long time, which is to try and think about how the world could have turned out if we didn't have fiat money, or fiat money died and we stayed on the 20th century on a gold standard. I think it's just a fascinating question. So if you've read the Bitcoin standard and the fiat standard, you see that I talk a lot about the difference between the 19th century and the 20th century. And of course, there were so many things that were better in the 19th century in terms of the monetary system and the implications that had, and that the most incredible inventions came around in the 19th century. People had savings. People had a lot less debt than they do right now. People were more financially secure, even though they were likely poorer. And in the 20th century, of course, our living standards improved enormously, but that was because of the technology. I don't think that it was because of the monetary system that we have. Ultimately, the main scam that they teach you in fiat economics is that all of these amazing things that we have in the 20th century were because of the money printer. We figured out that if the government can just rob us while lying to us and telling us it's for our own good, then we start getting airplanes and cars and TVs and all of those amazing things. Like, all it takes for us to invent things is to just have governments and banks rob us.
Because they're so much more efficient with capital, right?
Exactly, yeah. But of course, I think the key flaw with that argument is that ultimately the most important technologies of the 20th century were the technologies that were invented under the gold standard in the 19th century. Basically, everything you think of as 20th century technology was really invented before 1914. And airplanes are my favorite example of this, because they were invented by a couple of bike shop owners. The Wright brothers were a couple of kids from Dayton, Ohio, who had a bike shop. They fixed people's bikes, and they saved money in gold. And they took that money and they started tinkering with machines, and then they built an airplane. And they managed to fly that airplane. And they weren't the only people who were doing that. There were many, many, many people all over the US and Canada and Australia and Europe who are trying crazy things like this. And several of these people succeeded in all kinds of different things. So that's how we got the airplane. We didn't get it because the central banks were printing money. We got it because people had gold savings that could allow a bike shop owner. How many bike shop owners do you know are out there experimenting with the cutting edge of aviation technology today?
Yeah, they're trying to put food on the table is what
exactly. They're trying to put food on the table and trying to buy a meme stock or a meme coin, or trying to speculate on Dogecoin or something like that. That's what your average bike shop owner is doing today, not this, or even the mechanic shop owner, if you want the 21st century analog. So in this book, what I do is I go through this thought experiment. I thought long and hard about how we could just get rid of fiat and see what would happen if we had gold, because then we'd have all of the technologies of the 20th century that were invented under the gold standard, but then we'd have a monetary system which wasn't designed to destroy people's lives as we currently have. We wouldn't have all the death and destruction and war, and we'd have a much, much better century. I think the really strong argument that I make here is the counter argument, the idea that if it wasn't for the money printer, who would invent the airplane and who would invent all of those things? And the answer is, if it wasn't for the money printer, we'd have a lot more of those things. So it's a very elaborate thought experiment where I try and speculate about what the century would have looked like if we had stayed on the gold standard. And the way that I do it, I ended up, I could have just gone with some kind of absurd 3-page twist in history where something happens and we just stay on the gold standard, or the Bank of England burns down and we just move on. But no, I ended up, this kind of what took so long is that I ended up going with a really, really, really elaborate story of how the fiat standard dies. And it has to do with the Wright brothers. So basically, the invention of the airplane in the they invented it in 1903 or 1904, something like that. And around that time, they initially what they did, the Wright brothers, was after they invented the airplane, they spent about the next 10 years or so suing everybody who was doing anything with an airplane because they wanted to make money from them. So in this book, they stopped trying to sue everybody and they just focus on building airplanes instead and making money from building airplanes. And so then there's a huge boom in aviation that starts around 1910. And so that by 1914, when World War I comes about, aviation has taken off so much that there is, thanks to this eccentric French businessman, real guy who existed. He's the first to fly across the channel from France to Britain. His name was Blériot. And he was also the guy who invented the headlight on the car. So he had made a ton of money from inventing the headlight, actual in the real world. And then he used that money to build airplanes. And then he built one of the biggest and most important aviation companies in France in the early 20th century. And so in my book, he unites with he uses his money, he unites with the Wright brothers. He tells them to, stop suing everybody and let's just set up a business. I want to set up a business that is going to help the airplane take off. That's going to help the aviation industry scale. And it's the only way that we can scale the aviation industry is we find a commercial application for it. And at this point, airplanes are still too small and too slow to move people around. We want to move something around. We want to move something that's really, really valuable per unit of weight. And so he chances upon the idea of moving gold around. And so he sets up a gold clearance business based on airplanes, decentralized, uncensorable, and an alternative to central banks. And he calls it the Blériot Transport Company, BTC. And his first jet that he uses for these clearances is called the Lightning Jet. And he works with the Wright brothers. And so they set up a company for moving gold around all over Europe and North America, and then the rest of the world as well. And so that by the time World War I comes about, their airplanes are so good and so fast that they can just take off from anywhere. And, they didn't have anti-aircraft guns at that point. And so people didn't have to turn in their gold to the central banks. They could just continue to trade with one another. And that meant that when the central banks started to print money in 1914 and 1915 to finance the war, their currencies collapsed. And so the entire central banking system collapsed, and the world goes on a decentralized alternative to the fiat monetary standard, and it's all built on gold. And then I go through a very elaborate few chapters where I sort out all of the mess of World War I. I could have just stuck to economics, but I just decided, no, World War I is way too interesting.
Why stop there?
Yeah, why stop there? Exactly. So I thought World War I is just too interesting. So I sort out all of the mess of World War I, and then try and figure out what would politics have looked like in the 20th century if we didn't have central banks. And it's, obviously the main lesson is it applies to the 20th century, but it's also a way of thinking about the world in the 21st century where Bitcoin is going to get rid of central banks and do what these airplanes did. Try and think about, what happens when governments don't have access to the money printer, and what is going to happen to how governments operate, and what's going to happen to money, what's going to happen to capital, what's going to happen to technology, energy consumption. It's just an endless array of questions, and that's and the more I write, the more ideas I get. That's why I delayed the publication of it, and I'm still.
I've already got questions, but I don't want the answers because I want to be surprised. But I'm curious if don't give it away. But I'm curious if World War II even happens in your book, given Weimar and
No, the short answer is no.
Yeah,
no, it doesn't. Think about it. If there's no central bank. And all of the mess of World War I is there's no winner in World War One. They all lose,
Yeah.
and then the people just manage to continue to trade with one another peacefully, and the governments are all screwed. And so then there's no World War II.
That sounds like a utopia, my friend.
It is. It's exactly a utopia, and it's. I mean, you know me. I'm not a very subtle person, so I'll go out of my way to make it extremely utopian.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Saifedean, this has been great. I have one final question to toss your way, if you'll indulge me here. And this is, it's the most important question of the entire interview. So I'm going to tee you up. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's got to be addressed. It's the elephant in the room here. But I did recently interview Michael Saylor, and he said he preferred cast iron over stainless steel pans. And so my question is, why do you think he would personally attack you like that? And what author will be replacing his foreword in the third edition of the Bitcoin Standard?
Yeah, I'm still not over that. I feel betrayed. I did take it personally. And I'm taking applications for people to write the introduction of the next printing of the Bitcoin Standard. You're welcome to suggest, guess, or maybe apply. Write your own intro.
Yeah, but write it blog form, tag Safe, put it out, see how you do. Great. You could just put.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, I can't. I do take it personally, but also you can't fault Michael. I'm sure he hasn't cooked the steak since the Industrial Revolution, so he hasn't figured out how stainless steel is superior. Yeah. So it's okay. I don't hold it against him.
Is this what breaks Michael Saylor? Does he pull it to lab after this? What happens?
Yes, this is going to be the next COVID.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Safe, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. It's been far too long, and hopefully I'll see you in person at an event or two coming up here. But either way, really appreciate it.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Hey, you. Yes, you watching the Bitcoin price movements and the latest exciting news. It's awesome to stay informed, but the real power of Bitcoin comes from taking control. Don't just watch, take action. Head over to btcsessions.ca/learn for free step-by-step tutorials that guide you through every major skill you need to know, plus full video playlists for deeper dives on any topic you like. And if you're ready for the ultimate fast track, scroll to the bottom and check out bitcoinmentor.io for premium one-on-one experience with my team of Bitcoin experts to ensure you get it right the first time. Don't wait. Secure your Bitcoin future today. Hit the link in the show notes or scan the QR code on the screen.